tell me where to look.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you for coming to the Harnessing Technology for Social Good lecture series. Today, I am excited to introduce our very own Rosalba Hernandez. Rosalba is an assistant professor at the School of Social Work. She has a PhD not in social work but in public health from the University of Illinois in Chicago, and she also completed a postdoc at Northwestern in cardiovascular epidemiology and prevention. Her work really intersects in the areas of positive psychology, cardiovascular health, and interventions. And today she's going to be showcasing two technology-driven interventions having to do with promoting positive psychology and reducing stress. So with that, this promises to be a very exciting way to close out the fall series. We'll be back in the spring, by the way. We're closing out the fall. She's going to be doing a lot of demonstrations using the virtual reality technology, and she's got some people here to help her. So with that, let's give Dr. Hernandez a round of applause. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and to cap off this technology series. And do come back in February when we have Will Schneider doing a presentation. So today I will be telling you, why don't we just jump right to it. I will be giving you a very, very brief introduction to what positive psychology is. Then I'll present the work that we've done looking at the link between positive psychological well-being and physical health, particularly in a cohort of Hispanic Latino adults. Then I'll really move into the technology piece. So the first 20 minutes or so, I'll show you a bit of a build-up to why we're using virtual reality. But I'll show you an internet-based positive psychology intervention that we did with hemodialysis patients. And then I'll introduce the team who's developing the virtual reality world for our hemodialysis patients. And we'll have a demonstration of the virtual reality world. And I think we'll keep this up for those after the lecture if you want to try virtual reality. Some of you might be the first time or not using it. So after World War II, there was a great focus on psychopathology and abnormal behavioral health and mental illness. So a lot of research on depression, anxiety, and stress and how that impacts health. And at the turn of the 21st century, really, is when we start looking at, as researchers, positive psychological assets. So not only focusing on psychopathology and the negative constructs, but looking at and studying some of the positive constructs. So this is how we define positive psychological well-being. It reflects the positive feelings, cognitions, and strategies of individuals who function well in life and evaluate their life favorably. As you see, this is how we measure positive psychological well-being. In blue, this is what we term or label as hedonic well-being, and it's things like happiness, positive emotion, things that are intrinsic. And then we also have in red what we term eudaimonic, and this is more of not about feelings, but about life meaning and purpose. And then we have things in black that are sort of a blend of the two. Things like optimism, hope, emotional vitality. So these are the things that we're measuring and the constructs that we're looking at when we're looking at positive psychological well-being or positive psychological assets, okay? This is the theoretical framework. I won't go through it in detail, but it's the idea that positive psychological well-being and these constructs buffer against stress. And that they lead to restorative processes. So there is research that shows that people who are happier, more optimistic, they tend to engage in healthier behavior. They're more likely to engage in physical activity, to eat healthier, to not smoke, to not drink in excess. And they also have better biological functioning, so lower levels of inflammation, lower level, of stress hormones. And this all leads to better cardiovascular health, which is the focus of my research. And this is true across the lifespan, from early life all the way to later life. So this really frames the research that I do. I'm going to briefly talk about this cohort. So a lot of the research that leads up to intervention works is really from secondary data. We first want to establish that there is a relationship between positive emotion and health before we try to intervene at all, right? So I use this cohort the Hispanic Community Health Study of Latinos. It's the largest Hispanic Latino cohort in the United States, and it includes 16,415 individuals. And they all sat at the baseline exam from 2008 to 2011 through a 7 to 8 hour exam, clinical and survey exam. They were provided lunch, and some of them were taken home, so it's a great effort. So far, SOUL participants have participated in the baseline exam and then a shorter visit too from 2014 to 2017. SOUL has about an 85% retention rate from wave 1 to wave 2, and now they're planning a wave 3, so it'll be a longitudinal study. It is very large, and there's a great representation because the Latino group is very, very heterogeneous. So we have people from Cuba, Mexico, Puerto Rico, so we have the power in the data set to look at differences by heritage group. These are the different field centers that recruited and collected data for SOUL. If you see the Chicago one, UIC is actually the Chicago site. We have the Bronx, San Diego, and Miami. And then UNC Chapel Hill is where all the data goes to, and we have the analysts there, and where the data is housed, the coordinating center. There is an ancillary study. So of the 16,415, a subsample completed even more surveys. And we wanted to know about social, cultural, and psychosocial factors. So of those 16,000 plus, about 5,300 completed additional surveys. And we asked them about stress, cognitive emotional factors, a lot of the constructs that you might not be able to see. But in this little box here, we have purpose in life, self-esteem, and optimism. And that's what we looked at in this particular study. So our aim was to look at what is the association between optimism and cardiovascular health in this cohort. This is how we measured optimism. We use a survey, and it includes 10 items total, but we only use 6 items to score it. And you develop a score from 0 to 24, so it's a continuous score. 0 is least optimistic, 24 is the most optimistic. And then we looked at whether it was associated with this metric of cardiovascular health. Cardiovascular health is this new metric that was developed by the American Heart Association. And it really focuses not on cardiovascular disease, but on cardiovascular health and how can we have favorable levels across the different cardiovascular disease risk factors. So it's really looking at your health. And it looks at 4 different health behaviors and 3 different health factors. The behaviors are self-reported, so we ask people, have you smoked? We ask people how often they engage in physical activity. But the remainder are objective and collected at the clinic sites. So we collect blood samples and we have the different measurements for glucose and cholesterol. So then we take these metrics and we score them from 0 to 2, and then we create a composite score of cardiovascular health. And that ranges from 0 to 14, where 14 is ideal cardiovascular health. You're meeting all the metrics 100%, right? I won't go through detail of this, but this tells you exactly how we score them from 0 to 2. And then we create that global score across the 7 metrics. This is the characteristics of this SOUL cohort. About 42%, 42 years of age was the average age. About 50% were women. If we see here, it's lower socioeconomic status, about 32% less than high school, 46% less than $20,000, and that's annual household income. And as you see, the majority of the SOUL participants in this ancillary was foreign-born. They're not born in the US. Here's the optimism score. These are the average scores across the heritage groups. This is a question I get a lot. Is there a difference across the different heritage groups in optimism? And here we're seeing that there really isn't. And if you see, these are the normative data. Students, college students on average, their optimism score is 14.3, and patients getting ready for bypass surgery about a 15.16. So slightly higher than college students and also bypass patients. And this one I won't go into detail, but what we're seeing here is that each unit increase in optimism is associated with higher cardiovascular health scores, regardless of how you sort of model, whether you're using cardiovascular health as a continuous score, or if you look at who meets 4 ideal criteria versus not. We did a very similar analysis only on sole participants that had chronic kidney disease. And here what you're seeing is a cardiovascular health score, and then positive affect or positive emotion. And as you see, as positive emotion increases, we're seeing higher scores of cardiovascular health. And a 1-point difference in cardiovascular health is related to different odds of experiencing a heart attack or a stroke. So it's clinically significant. And again, we found the same thing, that each unit increase in positive emotion or positive affect was related to better cardiovascular health in those with chronic kidney disease. So I hope that this shows you that there is a link, and we've written now multiple systematic reviews or selective reviews that show that there's a link between emotion and health. But why does that matter? Can we even change someone's optimism, happiness, or is it just genetically based, right? So that's the next question our team tried to answer. So can we teach people how to increase their well-being and positive emotion? So do you think that's possible? How many of you guys think it's possible in the audience to change people's emotions? Okay, so let's see if this might work for the audience. Is it working? Yeah? Some people like dogs. Dog person? Yeah? This one? Yeah. Sometimes people are like, yeah, it's working. Others are like, it's stressing me out. So it depends on your perspective. But we actually have skill sets and behaviors that we teach people in order to increase their positive emotion. I won't go into details on this, but you can talk to me if you want to know more. There's 8 different skill sets that we teach people in order to increase their positive well-being. The first is noticing positive events, and it's as simple as having participants write down what 3 things went well for you today. And so it's a technique where they, before they go to bed, they jot down 3 good things that happened to them. We also have capitalizing on positive events, and that's the idea. If something good happens, you want to stretch out the benefits. So maybe you share with someone, or you celebrate and you go out to lunch with someone to celebrate that accomplishment or positive event. Next is gratitude. I won't go into detail through all of these. The other is mindfulness. We teach people how to be in the present moment, and we also teach them about meditation. We have positive reappraisal, and that's the idea of finding that silver lining when a negative thing occurs. What's something that I can learn from this particular event? The next is focusing on personal strengths, making and pursuing attainable and specific goals, and also acts of kindness. So research shows that if you volunteer or you help someone out, that increases your positive emotion. So these are all the skill sets that we've incorporated into our intervention work. Okay? So now I want to show you what we're doing in dialysis patients. So depression is very prevalent in end-stage renal disease patients. Depression is associated with all of these different adverse outcomes in this particular patient population. They have lower adherence to prescribed medication, increased risk of hospitalization, and increased risk for mortality if they experience comorbid depressive symptoms. Current treatment options that are published right now really focus on pharmacotherapy, and sometimes the patient or the clinician is reticent to add another pill, an antidepressant, because they're already taking 12 plus meds when they're on dialysis. And the other approach that has been used is cognitive behavioral therapy by a licensed clinician who goes there physically and sits chairside and offers the intervention to treat depressive symptoms. So our research team said, how can we use technology to address the distress that this patient population is experiencing? And how can we focus not only on diminishing depressive symptoms and distress, but also boosting some of that positive emotion at the same time? So we did a pilot study where we wanted to look at the acceptability and the feasibility of conducting an internet-based positive psychology intervention in this patient population. And then as an exploratory aim, we wanted to know if we intervened, would we see any changes in depressive symptoms, in quality of life, and dietary adherence in this particular patient population? So we enrolled 14 people, and these are the inclusion criteria. Older than 18, on dialysis for 3 months or more, a CESD that measures depressive symptoms of 10 or greater. They had to speak English because all the content is in English, and they had to have no serious comorbid medical conditions that would restrict them from participating in our 5-week intervention. So feasibility really looked at recruitment, refusal, retention, all of the typical things when you look at feasibility. And then we also looked at changes in depressive symptoms, quality of life, and behavior. And that was given before and after the 5 weeks. The 5-week intervention, these will look very familiar to you. This included the 8 skill sets that I talked to you about before. Positive events, gratitude, mindfulness. And this content was delivered all online through our website using an Apple iPad. And it was delivered chairside during hemodialysis treatment. So as you guys will see, Brett is here, and he was at the clinic, and he would go whenever the patient had their appointment, and he would hand them the Apple iPad. They would log in, or sometimes we would log them in, and they would go through our content. Every week, they learned something different. So if you see here, week 1, they learn about positive events, gratitude, and mindfulness. And so they learn about the content, and then they practice that skill set during that week. They have to read the content and practice it at least twice, and then after 7 days, it opens up the next week for them to learn that skill set. So I want to show you a video. This is a video from the original online intervention, which was used for depressed adults online. So this is sort of what fed into our adapting it to hemodialysis patients. So let me go ahead and play that.
Welcome to the Miracle Study. This study was developed by Dr. Judith Moskowitz, one of the world's leading experts on emotion and coping from Northwestern University. The Miracle course is online and self-paced and lasts about 7 weeks, and if you are eligible to participate, you'll learn 8 positive emotion skills that have helped bring people moments of joy, pleasure, interest, and closeness into their lives, even while dealing with serious stress or symptoms of depression. Participants will learn about the science and real-world applications of the positive emotion skills and practice them every day. We offer payments for filling out questionnaires about how you're feeling, such as questions about your emotions. If you fill out the screener questionnaire but are not eligible to participate, your information will be destroyed and will not be used for this study.
So this is really the original online version that was used and that we took from Judy Moskowitz as a colleague, and we adapted it and we made it for hemodialysis patients. Next, I'll show you for Marigold what their login looked like for their website, and then I'll show you guys our website and what the participants viewed on the Apple iPad.
Welcome to the Marigold study. To get started, just click on Forgot Your Password on the Marigold login page and enter your email address. You'll receive an email shortly containing a password that's been generated for you. Next, return to the login page, and once you enter your email and password, you'll have access to the course. Different versions of the course may look slightly different, but each of them provides access to the skill section at the top left corner. If you click on it, you'll have access to the Marigold lessons, and you'll have new material unlocked for you each week. Make the most of your learning by clicking on the practice section, where you can access the home practice activities and review the ones you've completed. And finally, remember to access the feel section of the course each day to complete the daily emotion survey.
That's also something that we included within our website. So the hemodialysis patients were able to report when they visited our website how they were feeling. And so we have about 26 different emotions that we're able to tease through and see the type of valence. Do they feel calm, excited? And we also have negatively valenced. And so we're able to use that detailed data as well to sort of look at its relationship with different outcomes. This is a screenshot of what ours looked like, but why don't I just go ahead and visit that website, and I can show you guys what our dialysis patients got to see. And you'll notice that it's in Spanish right now. So we're transitioning our website because we're designing it for Hispanics with hypertension. So this is the first time that this type of curriculum in positive psych is going to be available in the Spanish language. So we went through many months of translating all of the content and finding videos that would replace the videos in this particular curriculum. So as you see, Brett is the user here. Let's see. That should work. So participants would sometimes input the data themselves, their username and password, but for the most part, we help them through that if they had trouble. And as you'll see, we learned some lessons when using Apple iPads to deliver our intervention.
Strength and goals practice.
Let's see if I'm able to. That's not quite what I wanted you to see, so let me see if I can. I might just have to hit the back button. Oh, so this is what it looks like. So they log in, and this is not what they see. Right now you see all 5 lessons, which present all 8 skill sets. When the participant first logs in, they only see week 1 material. Week 2 material doesn't pop up until they finish reading and they practice it during a 1 week period. So why don't we let's go straight to week 2, which is mindfulness. Let me just briefly show you what that looks like. So the interface, this is what it looks like. This is where they can practice the different skill sets. This is where they have the link to the curriculum and the text. Here's sort of the title page. And when you click on this, so I'm going to go to Mindfulness Meditation. And it says, welcome back. You've read about mindfulness and how you can bring your awareness to the present moment, anytime and anywhere. So they read through the content and they learn about mindfulness. So I'm just going to click through it. And they also get to practice meditation. So let me play that briefly. I won't play it so you guys don't fall asleep, but listen to it for a little bit.
This is a 10-minute guided breath awareness exercise. The purpose of this exercise is to experience and cultivate.
So you guys can imagine, they're sitting on the dialysis chair, right? And they have the Apple iPad, and they're going through our material. They have headphones, and they're able to meditate. Some did fall asleep, but it really helps them to sort of de-stress, and that's how it looks. And we also have, I won't show you, but we have videos embedded as well, so they're actually able to view videos on our website. And here you'll see a navigation tool, so they can go to different lessons, and then up here they can navigate back to the home screen if they want to look at another lesson. So if, for example, they're in week 3, they can always visit week 2 or 1 if they want to refresh their memory on that content. I also want to show you that every week they have this bonus material. If they click on it, it creates a PDF, which we actually printed out for them. And it provides a handout summarizing what they learned for that particular week and that skill set. And all the participants, I think for the most part, wanted it printed out so they could take it home and have it. And a few people, well, no, actually everybody wanted the login information so they could visit the website at the end once the intervention was complete. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. And this is what we found when we delivered this to the 14 people that I told you about. This was the average age, 57. About 50% were female, 50% non-Hispanic white. We had African American patients and 1 Hispanic Latino adult. As you can see, these are all self-report, but 92% said they had hypertension, 71% said that they had high cholesterol, 64% diabetes. So these are all risk factors for the development of chronic kidney disease. So in terms of feasibility, we approached 48 people. At the end, we enrolled 14, and 12 remained throughout the whole study, so we had 85% retention. They visited the online platform about 3.5 times per week, so Brett was there every time they had a dialysis treatment. For those that are unfamiliar, dialysis patients have to go to the clinic on average 3 days, and each of those days they're there for 3 to 4 hours. So it's really a life-changing chronic illness. And they completed the practice exercises associated with those skill sets about 2.2 times throughout the week. This is some qualitative feedback. The program helped me enjoy life more. I felt that there was somebody who actually cared about me and my kidney disease and wanted help. So they really qualitatively expressed that they enjoyed the program. And this is what we found among those 12 that remained in the study. Depressive symptoms went down significantly, both statistically significant and clinically significant. We went from about a 15 to a 10.9 or 11. And among those that started with even higher scores, the subgroup, they went from a 20 to an 11. So it's making a difference. And this was just handing them an Apple iPad and having them go through our curriculum. So lessons learned from this pilot. One was we need new strategies to increase retention. Many times dialysis patients will refuse or say they're not interested. They either want to sleep or they want to do other things. So how do we make it so that we motivate them to participate in things that might be beneficial, right? The other, we found that we were able to reduce symptoms of depression, or we saw a reduction. So this could potentially, and more testing is needed, right, in a randomized control setting where we have a control arm. But this has a potential to reduce costly face time with clinical staff. It could be used as a supplement to the social workers that are at the clinic. But we had some barriers. Let me see if I can go back really quick to this picture. So we're gonna hand this participant, or this patient, an Apple iPad. Do you guys foresee any potential barriers to giving this participant an Apple iPad? Scream it out. Yeah, how am I gonna hold the Apple iPad comfortably, right? What's another thing? Let's say he's 75 and he's never really used technology. That could potentially be a barrier, right? We had instances where patients accidentally clicked out and they didn't quite know how to get back and navigate the Apple iPad. The younger folks, no problem, they would navigate, but Brett was there and he would have to get him back on the right page, right? So these are some of the barriers that we saw. More evident now that we've done the pilot. Let me just go back to that barriers. So literacy was also a barrier. Some people had difficulty reading through the text, particularly for those with lower SES. And sometimes people don't want to read through text. So how do we make it more accessible for those with limited reading proficiency? Technical difficulties, I sort of explained those, that people sometimes had trouble navigating the Apple iPad. The other is handling the iPad. So you really had to hold it with one arm and sort of go through. And so future studies, we really looked at long-term sustainability. We definitely want to do a randomized trial where we have a control group, but we want to see, are the benefits to their emotion, do we see those after 6 months, after a year? Randomization, I sort of talked about that. And then we decided to move to virtual reality. We think that moving to virtual reality will address many of those barriers. So through virtual reality, which we'll move to in a couple minutes, you don't have to use your hands. You don't have to read a material. You will be hopefully able to navigate it just by your vision, just by your eye movement, and by your head movement. So it really addresses a lot of those barriers. And so we contacted CITL and we said, we have a vision. We want to go from an internet-based curriculum and we want to move everything to virtual reality. And so right now what we're doing is phase 1 safety testing. And so I will introduce you guys to Drew. And Drew works at CITL. He is developing our virtual reality world. And so he'll take over the floor and he'll tell you what we're trying to do Because the thing that we want to do first in clinical trials is phase 1, just safety testing. We want to know, can this be used with this population without causing nausea, severe headaches, because they're already experiencing symptoms from the dialysis procedure. And so we're going to do the safety testing, and we're going to measure all of these different symptoms and how they're liking it, not liking it. And so we took, of those 8 skill sets that I showed you, we took only one module, the Mindfulness Meditation, and we're moving that one into virtual reality, and we're going to test that out for safety. And so I'll give the floor to Drew, and he'll walk us through the design, and then we'll actually see what the virtual world looks like currently.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Drew. I work at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning as a visual media design specialist. So I usually create animations, illustrations that promote learning for staff, researchers, educators, things like that. My background is as a medical illustrator, so a lot of the concepts that I apply in that work in terms of engaging and motivating students was applied to this work in virtual reality. So when Rosalba came to Kelly and I, we kind of sat down. She discussed with us the Marigold project, both the successes and some of the least successful parts of it, and how we can adapt that to virtual reality. What we did when we first got this is we went through the Marigold study and kind of read through, got a feeling for the product, and I was trying to assess where we could take this in virtual reality, since it is quite a different medium that has different skill sets. But what we wanted to focus on in this product is actually considering this as a product and not solely just one experience or an isolated experience for the patient. Thinking about this in a broader context that would allow us to expand into more skill sets and exercises later on. We also wanted to focus on making sure that this was accessible for every individual, as well as gamifying some of these core concepts to help patients bring these skills home and to actually incorporate them into their life. So as we went through, we tried to come up with a way to plan and explain these processes to individuals. Because virtual reality is such a new technology, there's not a standardized way in which you present information to people to try and explain how the experience is going to flow. So this is something that's currently being developed, and every studio has their own different way of doing this. But the way that we thought about doing this is by using this experience flow. So that way you could kind of see exactly what the user will be doing at each step. So for this virtual reality experience, we decided to focus on the part of the presentation where they're actually learning about mindfulness and the skill as a sort of generalized concept, and then moving that into another scene where they're allowed to practice that skill set. So that way we're breaking it up into a learning and then a practicing. So it starts with the user entering this office type space, which was a very interesting thing to consider because I'm not an interior designer, I'm not an architect, so those things fall outside of my purview. But those things definitely affect the way that you perceive your environment. For example, we didn't want to place them into a cold, sterilized environment, because why would you put someone in virtual reality that looks just like the room that they're already in? So we had to have those kind of considerations. And then for the second part, we opted to go for more of a garden, more surreal world because the individual would already have been introduced to virtual reality in the first scene. So this was just the way that we were trying to plan and communicate across different groups of people how this project would look. So here I took to Photoshop to put together a drawing and schematics to kind of show everyone the way that I imagined the room being laid out. Again, including just a very simplistic room, maybe a sort of intimate therapist office or something like that, something where the patient could feel comfortable. So including a big lounge chair, books, and a TV. Then for the second scene where they're actually practicing the mindfulness technique, we put them into this sort of surreal garden, spacey kind of environment, because again, it's the virtual world. We can do anything. So the main part here is we have this tree that you're looking at, and we're exploring the idea of getting the patient to focus on their breath using particles to represent the patient breathing out and in, using these sort of visual items as metaphors to get them to focus and recall. And then here is the flat projection of the room that I did. So I put this and drew this in Photoshop, and it allowed Kelly and I to kind of scroll around the space in a two-dimensional way, allowing us to kind of see exactly how an individual would sit in the room. So Brett, if you want to hop in, we'll start demoing.
And part of the reason we wanted them to start out in a sitting position is because they're already sitting. So we don't want to throw our patients off by having them stand when they're not going to be standing. They're just going to be sitting.
Yes, so as Rosalba mentioned, she brought up some of the concerns, especially with patients being able to handle the technology. So I thought of using this TV set as a way to kind of introduce them into the environment. For those of you who haven't really worked in virtual reality, this is what the Oculus Rift controller looks like. So we're actually not using this. As you can see, this thing's kind of a weird device. It's not quite sure how you're supposed to hold it. It's not very accessible for individuals who may not who may have arthritis or other conditions that affect their hands. So these controllers can cause a lot of issues like that. So the way we're kind of mitigating that is by allowing the user to use their gaze to interact with the environment. Also, in terms of literacy, having a spoken dialogue of what would be going on will help those patients. So we'll have Rosalba's voice projecting from the television set, and then that allows us to also project captions or slides or other things on that TV. So it acts kind of like this liaison between an environment they may not be sure about and a TV set with interacting through a menu system on that, which most people are pretty familiar with. So in this scene, they will be reviewing the core concept. It'd be them being taught about what they're going to learn. And then once they're finished in this scene, they would be moving to the garden scene.
So there you saw, as Brett was moving his head, he's viewing different aspects of that room. So it really is a 360-degree view of that room.
Yes, so patients are allowed to turn around. We tried to keep the spaces created in such a way that they weren't really tempted to try and look around too much, because if you're sitting in a chair, it makes it very difficult to do that. And then this is the second environment where they will be practicing the skill of mindfulness, which seemed like the best skill to kind of directly translate into VR as a test concept. So we have these leaves that are growing on this tree here, and those serve as a sort of, again, a visual metaphor for focusing on your thoughts, having a fleeting thought and watching it drift away. So eventually when we get this interacting, the patient will look at a leaf, it will fall off the tree and then slowly float into the stream. Again, this is just to get the patient to visually focus on one part, try and clear their mind as they're watching this slowly float away. So both of these environments are to help the patient just be relaxed, de-stressed, and gain and retain information.
So you guys can see that the blades of grass actually move, so the patient will be able to see that. If you look up, they'll be able to see the stars in the sky. And so we're going to try to build this out a little more. My dream is to have a little deer in the stream who will be drinking water, and then he'll slowly make his way off the screen so that participants are not distracted. But we can basically dream up whatever we want our dialysis patients to see in this virtual world.
Yeah. So the way that this was created is all the objects that you see in the scene were created in 3D modeling programs such as 3ds Max and Maya. Those were then imported into a game development engine called Unity. And so once all these pieces are put together and you add paint and texture and things like that, that's when you start getting this virtual world starting to come together.
We do have audio, but unfortunately it wasn't able to project, but the audio aspect of Rosalba's voice is working, but unfortunately just can't project it through the room.
Yeah.
So I was listening to Rosalba's nice voice while I put the headset
Which
on.
is weird to listen to my own voice through the app.
Is it in Spanish?
Right now it's only in English, but our vision is to translate it into Spanish at some point. And I feel like right now we're just like at the tip of the iceberg of what we can do with this technology in this particular patient population, and how can we expand it to other patient populations. Yeah. So let me show you. You can see the video. This is like a still, unless
Sure.
you want to
Show this video.
Yeah. Briefly, it really shows you exactly what you saw Brett sort of a little. So this is more of an earlier version. So here you don't see the fire. And here in the window, you can change it to any season that you want. And so you can imagine, you know, if you're working with another population that's mobile, you can add a deck where they can go out and sit in a garden. And you can add butterflies, which are very realistic, and they can be flying around. And then they would slowly transition into the meditation garden. And when we're testing this, we have a battery of questionnaires. So we're going to ask about different symptoms that they feel. Are they feeling dizzy? Are they feeling nauseous? And we're also asking them about the actual experience. Do they feel like they're really there? And so we have a whole battery of questionnaires. So at this point, we have IRB approval to go ahead and start testing. Once we complete the virtual reality world, we'll be entering the clinic to do this safety testing.
Data on what causes the nausea, or what percentage of patients have nausea or anything like that?
It's very little, isn't it, Drew and Keely?
Yeah, it's very little. The main key aspect is the acceleration and movement, which we are restricting here. So we should have very minimal, if not any.
I think, isn't it less than 1%, or did I make this up? I thought it was very.
It's less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
I just kind of, these guys have no idea when they're
Yeah.
at the house anyway, and they could perceive it to be due to this, even if it wasn't. Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about it, but it's just a
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons we sort of built it in, where we're going to give them the questionnaire on symptomatology right before and then after, to get a sense of. And we have different criteria. So if they have a history of epilepsy or seizures, unfortunately, they won't be able to participate in this iteration. I don't know about the future. And also, if they have a severe headache or nausea at that particular moment, we won't have them view our virtual reality world.
And, there will also be a very clear tutorial at the very beginning to introduce them to the whole interaction, the gazing, the whole VR interaction as such. And if they are not familiar, then they won't be put through the study.
Yeah. And so I guess I can open it up to question and answer. I think we really showed you what we're developing, but I can tell you a little bit about sort of the vision for this and what we want to do. So at this point, we have just a garden, right? But what are the possibilities? What if we could send them somewhere where they want to go? So giving them the choice to go to a garden, or to go to the beach, or to go to Italy, or to go to, wherever they want. And so that's the vision, is to try to expand it and create. And the other thing is that we were sort of debating about is, here you see that it's very, I don't know what the term is, but it's not a realistic sort of, it doesn't look like a real tree. It's sort of a surreal. And so that's one of the things that eventually we want to test out. Would a patient want a more realistic setting where it looks more like a video image taken live? Or do they like more of a surreal setting? And how can we compare those? And how can we give people the choice? Another thought that we have is thinking about how can we expand this to older adults who maybe have problems with mobility. And if you have, for example, someone of Hispanic, Latino background who's on hemodialysis and is an older adult and they can't, because of medical reasons, travel back to their home country, can we take them to their home country virtually to navigate their environment and the streets that they're familiar with? And what does this mean for their emotional well-being, and does that translate to any physical benefits? One of the beauties as well about dialysis patients in terms of the population, unfortunately, and how they're situated, is that they're a captive audience for about 3 to 4 hours. So we could measure their brain activity as they're visiting and interacting with the virtual world, and sort of measuring, what does that look like? How does their emotion map on to actual brain changes and activity? So those are some of the visions that we have. And so the next step after creating this and testing for safety is then developing the full 5-week curriculum into virtual reality. But it's not restricted to dialysis patients. Is this something that we can then create as a program which can be sold to others to be able to use as a virtual reality app and software? So I think that's about it. So if you guys, I'll open it up for questions from any of us. So we have Brett also, who has knowledge about the dialysis patients. He works with them very closely. And we have the production team here who has, if you have any questions about, and we will also leave this here if you want to sort of, you haven't used it and you want to try it out and what it looks like. So yeah.
What is the data on the sustainability of the changes? So that's actually one of the things you want to look at in the dialysis patients, but in Judy's work or your work, or how long have you seen benefits last after the intervention?
That's a good question. I think usually people have seen effects extended to 6 to 12 months. I haven't seen any, longer period type of interventions.
And are those what population?
Yeah, so this type of intervention was originally tested in healthy adults, then it moved to those with depressive symptoms, and now they're being tested in people with diabetes, HIV, and those with who've experienced a heart attack or a stroke. And so we're seeing a lot of benefits to their emotions, to their happiness and optimism, but we're really now trying to focus on, are there any physiological benefits? And so there's studies that show that in HIV patients, for example, when they view this curriculum, not in VR, but just as either paper and pencil or online, that they have a reduced viral load just from going through that intervention. We also have some evidence of improved blood pressure and so forth in different patient populations. So we're hopeful based on that evidence that this could potentially translate to dialysis patients. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Brett, you in the room with patients while they're doing this?
Yeah, so a dialysis clinic is set up with, it's an open kind of clinic to where you have 12 to 24 chairs. And when I say chair, it's like a lazy boy that they're sitting in. And basically, I signed them into the website, I handed it to them, and I left. I came back every few minutes to see if they had any issues or troubles, troubleshooting, and I would kind of get them back on track. And if not, I would just continue letting them go. An average of about 20 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes they would take to complete the material and then the exercises. So there was very minimal interaction between myself and the patient.
Okay, because I guess I was wondering then, my thinking would be, have any of the patients ever talked about difficulty with trust? Like once you put the device on?
So that's a good question. So we don't know that yet. So we've tested the Apple iPad, and we're hoping that early next year we can go in. And if you guys can see, you guys can at the end walk up. This is what we have to have when we're going to test the virtual reality. I don't know what all of these components are, but you need them. So this sort of detects your gaze and so forth. And I think Keely can probably explain it better. But we have to figure out how are we going to get this configuration into the clinic. So that's one thing.
And this is going to become even more smaller moving forward. So early next year, we are going to get better devices that are self-sufficient, that doesn't need a laptop, that doesn't need sensors that you can see on either side of the laptop. So that'll be just standalone headsets that doesn't even need any, that'll just communicate through Wi-Fi and then deliver the content.
So I guess I would just suggest maybe that would be something to cover with potential participants, is addressing potential trust issues once they've got this device on.
Yeah.
And you're not aware of their environment.
Yeah, and so all of those things we have to consider, and also considering what happens if someone starts experiencing nausea or dizziness. So when we submitted IRB, we have an exit strategy that we're going to use, and we also, another thing that we have to think about, how are dialysis patients going to be using this? And we have to think about how are we going to make sure that we sterilize all of the equipment. So that's another thing that we have to think about when we're talking about phase 1 safety testing of this type of technology. Yeah.
Given all the complexities and costs of developing the VR approach, why not just stick with the iPad approach?
Because I think that the benefits will outweigh the cost. I think once we're able to translate it and get our curriculum in VR, it'll be a big expense at the outset with a lot of potential benefit. And so we're hoping, and my vision is that once it's developed, so that's the other thing. The next thing is to try to figure out how are we going to fund going from one, and CITL, Keely and Drew have donated their time to developing this one module. And we have a whole detail of how many man hours and time and resource it goes into it. But we have to figure out if we're going to expand it to all 5 modules, what does that mean in terms of time, resource, and how much is that going to cost? So we have to figure that part out. But we're trying to be creative. We were thinking if a clinic, for example, would be able to fund it, we would be able to potentially give them the software once it's developed. So we're exploring different options and how we could potentially fund that. But we're hoping that once we show that it's feasible and it produces good outcomes for their patient population, that they will see it as an investment, that these clinics will want to buy the equipment and get the software. Because, and I think Brett was telling me, if your patients are less likely to be hospitalized, then that will help the bottom line for the clinic. So hopefully that will be an incentive for them, if anything, to invest in this type of technology.
And also, just kind of answer your question a little differently. We have trouble with recruitment in this population, so having something new and fun like virtual reality may increase that recruitment versus an Apple iPad. Most people know what that is. They already have their view set on.
That's an empirical question.
Yeah, so they may not know. Yeah. So some older individuals I know where I don't know how to use an Apple iPad, and they kind of already push me away. Whereas this is new, exciting. They've never used it before, possibly, so their mind might be more open to it. So we'll see. Hopefully, it will increase recruitment to better kind of have more findings, more specific findings.
Yeah, it's definitely an empirical question. And how do we present it? Can we become better at marketing and saying, do you want to travel to a distant world for a little bit while you're here? And so hopefully that'll increase, but we don't know.
It'll also help in terms of accessibility, patients who have literacy issues, movement issues, you don't have to hold the iPad with one hand, which can get really heavy. Instead, you're using gaze space.
That's not a big tech problem.
Sure.
A low tech problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Like selfie stick, hold your.
no, not just holding, but it's also about you don't have to do anything to interact. The whole module will interact by itself, and all you do is to just gaze it and then nod, and those are the only interactions we intend to use.
Yeah.
You can see, if I were your customer, you'd have to convince me to go to the iPad to put my head into something.
And hopefully, for those that are curious, if you look at it, it looks like you're there. We were trying it out before we started the presentation, and I have to be careful, and Brett is like, no, there's nothing there. So you sort of question what you have around you. And imagine if it was more realistic and it was actual video, even more so, I think. So you sort of do forget. And that's what I'm hoping, that they're learning about how to increase positive emotion. But what are the benefits of getting out of the clinic? Just that, for a tiny bit of time.
These clinics are morgues. I mean, you got people next to you that are cramping, they're dying, they're having cardiovascular events, and that's my biggest intrigue with this and working this project is to get these guys out of there. I mean, they have blinders on, and they don't have to look at the rest of the clinic, and they oftentimes don't like the person next to them. And, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But that's the benefit of VR, in my opinion, for this particular population.
Yeah, and so that's something that we'll be testing out as well. When they're in the world, are they able to sense what's around them? And their blood pressure is being taken automatically, right? Every couple minutes, 15 minutes or so. So how does that affect their immersion in the environment? So that's all the things that we're going to try to capture during this phase 1. But I'm really excited. I feel like this could really be helpful. We presented the idea to a social worker at the clinic, and she says, yes, I need help. There are people, a lot of the patients who experience depressive symptoms or distress, and just to have the manpower to treat everybody will be difficult. But if we can sort of supplement and help what she does with virtual reality, I think that would be of great benefit.
Quick question about clinical feasibility.
Yeah.
Do you envision moving away from the Oculus?
Yes.
We are not.
Have something like a Google goggle or?
Yes.
We are not tied to one particular brand for this. As a development team, we are open to whatever that is best feasible for the patients. Yeah. So we intend to go to a mobile-friendly or even a standalone headset that will be most feasible.
Yeah, and and we want to test out what the quality is of the image and the interaction depending on the different types of modalities. But yeah, if patients, for example, want to meditate at home for 10 minutes, is it possible for them to just buy the one where you use the cell phone and we just sort of give them a copy of the software and they're able to do that? Yeah.
Yeah, I put Helen on the spot. She whispered that to me. So if this would be a setting, we could take it home.
Yeah.
So.
You could. Yes. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Let's give Dr. Hernandez and her team a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. I just want to say also thank you for supporting this series. We'll be back again February 7th with Will Schneider, who will be talking about parent training from a Head Start perspective using technology to do that. So come back. We have some exciting events for the spring semester. And until then, happy holidays to you all. Thank you.
And if you want to try it out, go ahead.
Stick around and practice. Have fun.
Maybe you can help. Yeah, we have to figure